was my wife, Christina, that said, all right, this isn't fun anymore. Either I quit or you fire me, but I think it's time that we begin looking at doing something else. And when we begin to look around, what are the other asset classes that don't have tenants? And we were left with land, parking lots, and self-storage. So I saw the writing on the wall. And after we bought our first facility, and once we got into it, I was just like, okay, this is everything that all these other folks talked about it. And it has the lowest loan default rate and the lowest loan loss rate of all commercial asset classes.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Jack Bosch Show, where we talk about all things real estate, finance, and entrepreneurship. And my guest today is my very good longtime friend, Scott Myers. He is known as the premier expert, really probably in the world, or for sure in the United States, on self-storage. So we're going to talk about self-storage and how you can make money with that. So that's an asset class I don't think we have ever talked about, or if it was years ago. I don't know, Scott, have you been with us before in the podcast?
I have not, Jack. We've known each other and had conversations over the past, 15 plus years, but I don't think we've done it on the podcast. So glad to be here.
That's right. So I'm excited to have you here. So let's jump right in. So tell us why do you love self-storage?
Oh, gosh, I think it probably is a culmination of my real estate investing career. Like many people started out in single family homes, and we began to scale that up. I bought my first property with no money down, learning from some of the gurus that came through our local real estate investor association. And we got up to about, about 40 or 50 houses or so, and then recognized that, wow, there isn't a whole lot of free time and a whole lot of extra cash flow like the gurus talked about. And so we thought, well, I just need to work smarter and harder. And so we went out and started buying multifamily, and we had not a whole lot. We had about 425 multifamily units in different complexes. But then what we found is that all they did is just kind of multiplied our challenges. Even though we had managers and management companies, it's tough when you slug it out in habitational real estate until you get to that place where you begin paying off some mortgages, or if you've had been in for a number of years and had some significant increases in rental rates across your portfolio. It is a lot of heavy lifting before you really get to truly having the cash flow and the freedom that you want. And so I thought, well, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And it was really, Jack, it was my wife, Christina, who that said, all right, this isn't fun anymore. Either I quit or you fire me, but I think it's time that we begin looking at doing something else. And we love real estate for all the reasons that everybody loves real estate. It appreciates. You can depreciate it. You can force the appreciation, and then somebody is renting your real estate if you're in rental real estate, and they're paying down your basis, and you get tax benefits for that as well. And there's no other investment out there that has all of those benefits. But as they say, everybody loves rental real estate if it weren't for the tenants. And well, without tenants, we don't have rental real estate. So when we begin to look around, what are the other asset classes that don't have tenants? And we were left with land, parking lots, and self-storage. And so I thought, well, land, I'm not really don't want to get into development. At the time, until I began having conversations with you, I didn't think there was a whole lot of ways to be able to create value in land like we would in rental real estate. Parking lots, same thing, but in self-storage, the more I began to look into it, it utilizes the same strategies of buying these undervalued self-storage facilities, like we buy undervalued multifamily projects and single family, and then we turn around the management, and we learn how to lease them up and improve the operations, drive expenses down, and increase the income, and then develop on if there's additional acreage nearby or next door or even down the road. But we can do that all without the hassles of tenants and toilets and trash, because there's just clients who are storing their stuff there. And so the more I begin to look into the asset class and how recession resilient it was, because when times are tough, people have to downsize and they store their stuff, and storage does better during a downturn than it does during a boom time. But during the boom times, people buy more stuff because things are going well for them. And so, it was that almost a perfect storm, the asset class that is very recession resilient, resistant. It does well during inflationary periods. All the benefits of real estate without the hassles of tenants and toilets and trash. And so I saw the writing on the wall. And after we bought our first facility, and once we got into it, I was just like, okay, this is everything that all these other folks talked about it. And it was this kind of this secret asset class, this Cinderella asset class that it isn't sexy because it's just metal boxes on concrete slabs. But what was attractive is all the cash flow without the hassles. And so we sold off everything. We sold off our houses and our apartments, and then we just went 100% into do self-storage. And, again, once we get into the operation side of it, then realizing when somebody doesn't pay, we can lock them out. We can sell their stuff off and recoup our back rent and late fees without having to go to court, because we have the protection of lien laws versus habitational laws in
Storage wars,
self-storage.
right?
So exactly, yeah, in real life and in real world. And so for all those reasons, that is why we just have grown.
On that end, do you actually have to auction these things up like you see on Storage Wars, or could you technically also just basically say like, okay, now we're shutting it down, and like when somebody doesn't pay, give them the time and thing, but you technically just open the thing up yourself and just like start a second business selling the crap out of whatever in those things?
Nope, that's illegal. You can't do that. That's not our right, because it's their stuff. And so we have to serve public notice, and we have to send them emails. We have to put public notice in the newspaper, send certified mail, and let them know, last known name and address, any heirs that we can find, to try to get them to come get their stuff and pay the back rent and late fees. And if not, then we have to go through the auction process. There are some folks that have stated, and depending on the attorneys you talk to, where you can, some states in which we as the owners, we have the right to bid on and can buy them, but we can't just take it on our own and just sell it off and do that. There are laws.
I was always wondering that, because I was like, hey, there's sometimes, like, I love watching the show Storage Wars. Sometimes I watch it. I mean, they design it with the different characters and stuff that they're doing and so on. It's obviously designed to be an entertaining show, but I mean, most of the stuff is junk that they get out of there. Most of it is junk. And unless you become like an antique dealership or a used stuff dealership, which I don't want to get into, there's not a whole lot of stuff working. But every once in a while, they find something really, really cool.
Right.
So it's like, and I loved like garage sailing, and I loved like bargain hunting, and that'll never go away. I mean, you look at Gary Vee; he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and he still likes garage sailing. So it's more like it's the hunt for the deal, I think.
It is, yeah.
So that's when I was like, I always wanted to ask you the question. I always forget to ask the question. So I'm glad to ask it now. So cool. That makes sense. It's a very similar kind of strategy to many people, that when you start building, then you accelerate, you accumulate, and then you realize that what you really built is something that like is crushing you, because you have built all these tentacles and all these different things that are moving pieces. So you're driven by your wife, which is not surprising, or they always know better, right? And basically it's like, no, let's find something else, and you moved into that asset. So now, how many units do you own, or partners or are part owners of?
Yeah, so we've, through the years, we've amassed over 5 million square feet and about 28,000 units. What is currently under management right now is about 60% of that, because we're buying and selling. We have a couple of different funds, a $25 million fund, a $50 million fund. That is the capital we've raised, and then we've got, that's layered on top of debt, and so we've got that amount of properties and value on top of that. And so, we currently usually run somewhere between 50 to 60 facilities, but again, as they're in funds or in syndications, and so as we either buy and create value in and stabilize, or build and then stabilize these facilities, then within 3 to 4 to 5 years, we're selling those off and sending the returns back to our investors, and then doing it all over again. So it is it's a rinse and repeat cycle that we've been investing in since 2000 and let me see here, we began syndicating back in 2011.
Right. Well, beautiful. And on top of it, you have an educational business where you teach people how to actually do that. And that's really like, there's some perfect synergies here, because you build them obviously on land. Like, I mean, everything is on land, but in particular this one, it's like, it's a slab, it's a bunch of metal boxes, and it's a few light bulbs. And if it's bigger, perhaps there's one apartment on site, right? So
correct.
That's typically what it's involved. So walk us through the asset class, walk us through a little bit through where do you typically like to buy them? Tell us what is like the perfect size of them. Just give us like the framework of what is self-storage. I mean, obviously we know what self-storage is. We all driven by 1,000 of them, but tell us, what is the business model self-storage, and give us some parameters around it.
Sure. Our business model, essentially, Jack, it hasn't changed since day one. We just perfected it, and then we've been replicating it, just rinsing and repeating over and over again, and then teaching, as you mentioned, our students in our education company really the same model, and that is, everything's value add because as you and I both know, you make your money on any investment, no matter what it is, when you buy, and so we have to buy undervalued, and so when we're looking at an undervalued existing facility, we're looking at a facility that is in a secondary or tertiary market. So it's difficult to compete and find some that are in the major metropolitan statistical area, especially downtown. Those are all picked over. They're premium properties. They're run by institutions rather than individuals. And so we're in the suburbs and we're on the outskirts. And so these are as we call the mom and pop facilities, and that is not a derogatory term. It just means that it's some folks that may have owned it for a while. They're not part of an institution. They may not have the most savvy of operational techniques and strategies or marketing. They may not have raised their rates. They may not have kept up the maintenance on their facility. They've just enjoyed the benefits of, owning rental real estate without all the hassles of tenants and toilets. And they haven't really optimized these facilities. And they may have kept them too long. They've depreciated them. And then either when it's time to sell, they're not worth as much because they didn't really keep up with the times or keep up with the property. And sometimes they sell because they never had cash reserves for the time when, the roofs needed to be replaced or the drive aisles needed to be repaved or, now there's 20 doors that are broken and they can't afford that. And they haven't kept up with technology or anything else. And now their competitors are eating their lunch and taking occupancy. And so then they decide to sell. Well, that's what we like because we know how to cure all of those. Those are all very simple, but we pay less than, not pennies on the dollar, but we pay much less than market value for those facilities because they need a lot of work. There's also a number of projects that we step into in which some folks have owned them for a number of years and they pass on, and the kids don't want to take over. Their heirs don't want to take over the facility, and so they may for a little while, and the performance slides, the value slides, and we pick them up from them at that standpoint. So anything that represents an opportunity, and it could be a very well maintained facility that people have owned for a number of years, but they just never raise rates. They just didn't keep up. They're over payrolled because they brought family in and they paid them too much to replace the job that they lost because they're just helping them out. Whatever that looks like, there's many ways to be able to move the needle to create value in these facilities. And then it helps, our model is these facilities that are in secondary, tertiary markets, 4 to 5 acres in size typically. And we search for, and hopefully these facilities will have the ability where if it's a 5-acre parcel, they built the buildings on 4 acres and we've got an additional acre that we can expand. Many times, in many cases, we can buy the land next door, behind it, across the street, or even down the road a half a mile, and it just becomes an annex site. They come into the office on the main site, and when they rent a unit, we have units or even parking for boats and RV, and they just tell them, well, it's down the road. It's, you see that gate down there? That's where you're going to enter the code in, and sometimes it's even less distance than going all the way to the back of the facility that you're in right now. They don't care and they don't mind, and it's a hub and spoke method. So any way that we can add additional square footage once the land has already been accounted for and it's not generating income, we don't pay for it on the front end. So that's and then we create the value by lowering the expenses, utilizing technology, putting in kiosks where we don't have to have managers on site. I mean, anymore, the cell phone, your iPad, your laptop, your cell phone, we have the software that allows these folks to complete the transaction, either reserve a unit and come down and finish it with the person on site, or to be able to complete the entire transaction without ever coming into contact with the person. It's a very, low labor intensive type of transaction. It's self-storage is a commodity. It's just a storage unit for people to store their stuff. And it's usually something for mom to check off her list of things to do that day to store her husband's stuff that has been accumulating in the garage and around the house. And so from that standpoint, it's not very labor intensive. And, once we get into these facilities, it's just a matter of monitoring the rates in the market, advertising to make sure that we get, in the right places to be able to get to all the eyeballs when people are searching for self-storage and, working with all the algorithms, Google ads and the number of different aggregators that we have at our disposal in our industry. And then just keeping an eye on the game. And, we find that people just don't do well and they don't optimize and stabilize their facilities because they treat it like a hobby and they're not walking the four corners of their business and they're not on top of every aspect of it. And well, we've got that down. We've got a plan. We've got a process, and we just go and tick the boxes when we buy a facility.
All right, so that's beautiful. So I like a lot of the things you said. Like, for example, low staff,
Mm-hmm.
low in a way overhead from
Mm-hmm.
operating it because there's like low electricity bills, low thing, and the kiosk. We'll get into that in a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but one question I always have, and that is, so like one of the things that always makes me nervous in any kind of real
Mm-hmm.
estate. So the reason we do land is because there's nobody there. The reason when if we own single families, which we have, we buy them
Mm-hmm.
in batches of portfolios so that we can
Mm-hmm.
have a professional property management company manage it
Right.
for me. When
Right.
we buy multifamily, we buy them with usually like 70 units and up,
Mm-hmm.
or ideally 90 units and up. So we can
Yep.
afford to have a leasing manager, a third-party property management company with a leasing manager, maintenance person, a regional manager. So here's the thing. So when somebody quits,
Mm-hmm.
they can take somebody else and make sure that they can get a temporary person in there. We like to
Mm-hmm.
hire property management companies only in market or in markets where they're already operating in, so
Yep.
that again, if somebody quits, they can just simply send somebody in
Mm-hmm.
from another property for
Mm-hmm.
until they hired somebody new to cover.
Mm-hmm.
If you run a self-storage unit and it has whatever number of units and there's only one person part-time there, or no person part-time there, how do you manage that if something goes wrong? How do you manage something
Mm-hmm.
if you have a squatter in the property? How do you manage it? How do you even know? How do you manage it
Mm-hmm.
if like you talked about the kiosks, and I think
Mm-hmm.
in personal conversations, again, we know each
Yep.
other forever, have
Mm-hmm.
lots of glasses of wine together.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you talk about these kiosks that are basically self-serve thing where you pick
Mm-hmm.
your unit, you scan your credit card, you scan your
Mm-hmm.
ID, it approves you get a lock or something that comes out or you thing, and you
Mm-hmm.
go and you take on your unit. How do you make sure that these places stay clean, safe? If you don't
Mm-hmm.
have somebody physically inspecting it all the time, if you don't have,
Mm-hmm.
or if it's a unit that has an apartment in it, the larger ones often have like a
Mm-hmm.
apartment. Well, what if that person quits and walks away? Now you got no backup. Like
Mm-hmm.
how do you solve this kind of situation?
Sure. Yep. Well, we have solved all of those, and so there's no need to worry, Jack.
Good.
Here's we approach it essentially the same as multifamily. So when I first got into the business, the ratio in multifamily is that you would have one full-time property manager on site for every 100 units or so. And again, that's the rule of thumb. Anybody can argue, that I'm off 25, 50, whatever you want to call it. And in
Yeah.
self-storage, it's one to every 400. Again, roughly, just depending on your business model and how you run it, one full-time person for every 400 units. And so, to mitigate that, well, first of all, we don't buy smaller facilities, Jack. We're only in these facilities that are basically 40 to 50,000 square foot, mostly usually around 60,000 square foot and tall and higher, because that means that there is enough payroll to generate, the percentage of income that it takes to cover full-time management at that facility. So we're not going to buy anything that doesn't scale, and it doesn't scale if it means that it involves my time in managing it. We have to put people in place or be able to utilize staff that we have in place to be able to manage that if we're going to add anything into the portfolio. And so even, to your point, the unmanned facilities that we have, yes, there are the regional managers or district managers, depending upon, who you talk to in the industry, that are going and keeping an eye on those sites. But it's rare that we have issues on site. If somebody's going to try to squat, if somebody's going to commit a crime or do anything that they shouldn't be doing in a self-storage facility, well, before they come into our facilities, in order to get through the kiosk, and even after they've rented to get through the gate, well, first of all, we collect their driver's license. It's barcoded. We scan all their information. We take their picture and they take a thumbprint on the kiosk. And so we've got their information when they rent a unit, more than multifamily even has. And then anytime they come in and out, we record it. And we have cameras on site, which records license plates, faces as people come in and out of the property. And of course, they have to put their unique gate code into the system in order to even walk in, and or to open the gate and drive in. And many times it's a key fob, depending upon our facility, and it's unique to them as well. So we can see anytime that anybody and everybody comes into that facility. If anybody's going to commit a crime, they're not going to do it at our self-storage facilities because we have cameras all over, on the front, on the drive aisles, showing the units. And so if you're going to do anything, you're on camera. The crimes that people used to commit in my rental portfolio were always in our houses, and they were always in our multifamily where there's not cameras because it's illegal to have them in all those places, and they could do whatever they want anytime they enter a unit, and we would never know half the time. And so, the meth labs and anything else that anybody wants to do, they don't do it in self storage. They did it in our multifamily and they did it in our houses, and so we got rid of all that. So yes, we keep an eye on our facilities, and people do visit them, but at the end of the day, we don't have people coming in and out. Then we just have people that store their stuff, so it's just a bunch of stuff that's sitting at the facility. And yes, they do come and check on them to see if there's anything that's out of line. But in all the years that we've been doing this, it is a rare occurrence that we have any issues just because somebody isn't on site babysitting the people that come in and out and take their stuff in and out of our facility.
You, as a scaling operator, go into areas where you own multiple, and therefore you have somebody that is on staff or a third party that actually does tour those, does make sure everything is done, even if they're like with kiosks. So
yeah, and I didn't answer the second part of that. So Jack, again, just like multifamily, we have third-party companies that we utilize, and we like to have those companies that have a presence in place already because we just tap into their website and their traffic, and then they funnel folks in our direction for our specific site, and they already have the regional managers, the district managers. Everything is already in place, and we just get to bolt on. And so you're right. If somebody does go south and is managing our facility, if it is a site that isn't unmanned, if we have to let them go, or if they have to let them go, or if they just decide to move on, without any disruption to our business, they pluck another person in that's already trained, that already knows the software and knows how to run our facility, so that there's no interruption in our business.
Now, let's take a step back and let's talk about the fundamentals of self-storage. Can you run me through some of the KPI parameters, like what does it typically cost to operate? Like from every dollar that comes in, like in multifamily, we usually say every dollar that comes in, 50% goes towards like operations and management and things like that. How does it look like in self-storage and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. And that's, as we were comparing business models, to make the jump to self-storage, the numbers all along the way, from the expense ratios to the KPIs, almost all of them were to the positive. So yes, when we were running our multifamily, pretty well known, 50% is utilized in operating expenses, which is a variable for the most part. Some are fixed, but a lot of that is variable. Whereas in self-storage, it's 30 to 35 cents on the dollar. And so, yes, a little bit of it is variable, but most of it is fixed in terms of insurance and property taxes. Our management, we can dial that in, but again, from the side of operations, the beauty of self-storage is that we know that there isn't going to be a month in which there's a high amount of vacancies, and therefore the cost of turning an apartment for us on the high end was about $1,300, and that means the lost rent, marketing costs, and then any repairs and maintenance, repairing carpet, replacing carpets, and you're out a month and a half of rent or so by the time you get that person out and get it done and move somebody back in. Whereas in self-storage, it's pretty simple. When they move out, the manager or the maintenance person goes over to the unit, they open it up, they take a blower, and they blow the thing out. And they close the door. And we're always running marketing because we always have people that are moving in and out of 400 units. Our marketing never stops. And so we can move in the person the next day. And, our accounts receivable, it could also, swing wildly if we can't chase these people down and we can't garnish their wages if they owe us back rent and late fees and they damage the unit in our houses and our apartments. Again, in self-storage, it's a metal box on concrete slab, so we know what it's going to be. It's going to be zero. So just think, Jack, if you look at your multifamily right now, and you knew that you were going to get roughly 100%, you reduce your accounts receivable to almost nothing. Ours is about 3% per month outstanding, and then you can move somebody in right away. That's aside from the rent. That's a far better predictable business model, and that's a much easier to then manage. It's easier to staff. It's easier to budget. It's easier to plan for expansion, and it's easier to also get funding from the lenders because they see that this is an asset class that has very few moving parts. It's a very simple, predictable business model that we can replicate over and over again. That's why it has the lowest loan default rate and the lowest loan loss rate of all commercial asset classes. So, for all those reasons, again, the reasons why it's not sexy, because it doesn't have all, the panache of being a multifamily investor. I got to tell you, once we made the switch, we found that this is the asset class to be able to scale and grow. And it's much sexier to have more cash flow in our bank account than it is to brag about a gleaming Class A multifamily in our book.
So a couple of questions. So in summary, your biggest expenses are property taxes.
Yep. Insurance and payroll,
Insurance.
depending on how we run our facility. Those are the top three.
Yeah. And then payroll, and then to some degree, it's what
really
else?
reserves. So it'd be repair and maintenance, and then any capital, expenditures or capex that we would have, in 5, 7, 10 years, depending on the drive aisles and the roofs and the doors. But that's it. That's all we got for moving parts.
All right. Okay. Very cool. Yeah, that makes it easier. So that means, though, if the profitability is usually higher, then the price usually is higher. And because at the end of the day, the market is not going to let an asset class sit around there that just produces bucket loads of money. So you're probably the prices are quite high. So then therefore the loan costs are high, and that eats up some of it, so that you again get to a good thing. But then again, once you pay it off over 30 years or something, or even over 20 years, the profitability of these things can become, as I can imagine, pretty substantial.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we still have to, we've created an army of assassins, both our own acquisition managers, as well as the army of people that we've taught about the business to go out and find these opportunities. And so we're always looking for the value add and for the deals, because any of the self-storage facilities that come out that we're buying from brokers, although there's many that do represent a value add component to them, yes, they understand, it is the hottest asset class. And so, yes, we are going to pay a premium for those that are out on the market. The good news is that once we find them through other means and from the pocket listings and working with the individual owners and then create the value in them, then we reap the benefits of being the asset class that it has the lowest cap rates, which means the highest valuations. And so when we're selling these properties, we get the benefit of that. And it's capital, because they're, again, more profitable than the other asset classes, and it just makes it easier to get funding once again when we can continue to show our lenders that hey, we've gone full cycle on all of these properties, and here's what our projections were, and here's how much we beat it by. It just makes life a lot easier.
That makes sense. And also on that angle is again over time, as you pay down debt over time, I think owning an asset long term that has that kind of a profit margin is obviously, and that low level of maintenance and overhead, it would be a very sweet thing. So we have a bunch of people in our universe here listening to this that know how to get land. If anyone wants to either get a land and send it to you, or partner with you, or get a land and develop one of these things themselves, where are you typically looking for? What kind of, again, sizes, locations? Does it be on a main road, on a corner? Does it matter? What kind of properties are you looking for when you look to develop?
Yeah. So, the business model for development has been the same from the beginning. You're looking for 4 to 5 acres. And what folks are still wanting, even though we've developed on a 3-acre parcel, we go vertical and we do 3 stories, the gleaming Class A facilities. We build those as well. And, it's all about location. It has to be visible. It's got to be close to, the population. Those are prime and premier pieces of land. Zoning for self-storage is always key. That's what we're looking for, so that we don't have to go through the process. And what we really like to see right now are some, we're seeing a lot of projects come across our desk that never got funded. So interest rates went up, costs went up. And so these folks, they either got through entitlement or are close to it, or they have a piece of dirt that's already zoned for self-storage. Or in some cases, they just, they ran out of runway, they ran out of reserves, and they actually built it. Now they've got certificate of occupancy, but they don't have the cash to see it through to stabilization, meaning a year and a half or 2 years of feeding it until it becomes cash flow positive or break even. So those are ideal for us. As the projects, the further down the road, usually the more valuable it is to us. But again, if it is just a piece of dirt, and if it's already zoned for self storage, then that's just something that we'd be interested in perhaps buying, and or we're open to some joint ventures, just depending upon what that looks like. And then anything that is in the rural or in the path of progress, approaching some of the rural parts of town because it's less per acre. And again, if it's zoned general commercial, and we know we can see a clear path to getting it zoned, then those are what we're looking for as well, so that we can build the single story temperature controlled drive up, because that's what folks really want. They still want access to be able to drive up and open up a door to their unit, but still have the convenience and the benefit of having it climate controlled as well.
Okay, so now you know. So 4 to 5 acres, and then again, usually on like street corners, usually on just does it matter as long as it had easy access, or is there any kind of specification to that?
Yeah, ingress egress is always important. One ways are usually not good, or even a boulevard in which you have to do a loop around to come back to. Visibility is key in our industry, although it's not everything, because when people are looking for self storage, I mean, they're looking on their phone, they're looking on their iPad, their laptop, and that's they want to see that something is close to them. It doesn't have to be necessarily on a main road. It just needs to be close to them and in the path of travels. Those plots that are tucked away in the back of an industrial area or zone, and it's difficult to get to one-way streets, and the drive time is a long ways away from any residential. Those are the ones that we'll discount, but it does need to be in a somewhat of a major thoroughfare, and usually on their way to work, on their way to school, or just in a retail area where people are doing business and just traveling to.
Makes sense. Good. So again, so now let's talk about so again, the two more aspects is one of them is those kiosks. So those kiosks, you touched about it a little bit. Can you just go into a little bit more? But how does that work? So it's like I envision it. You go to a self-storage thing. There's some kind of a building that you go inside. They're not just out there exposed to the weather. You go into some kind of a room. And there's like, it's almost like I envision it as like an ATM machine or something like that. That's in shape. Like, when you go there, and what do you do there? How does that replace an actual person that you work with?
Sure, you're 100% correct, and that is probably in I mean, we're a pretty static industry. There's not a whole lot of that is dynamic going on in our industry, but that has probably been the biggest. And so back when I started in the business in 2005 in self storage, we were one of the early adopters of the kiosk, and it was a big old unit that was installed in the wall, and it faced outside. So most of it was inside, and it was like an ATM, and people would stand outside of the building and outside of the fence, obviously, before they could get in, and they would insert their credit card. They would take a picture, put their fingerprint in, the rest of their information. They would choose from the map the unit that they wanted, and it would give them a little guide as to what would fit in, and what they an example of what they could store in a 10 by 10 and a 5 by 5 or a 20 by 15. And so they would complete the transaction, insert their credit card, their debit card, get a receipt, and then they would receive the unique gate code, so they could go over to the gates, enter, go in, and then unload their unit, put a lock on it, and they would complete that transaction by way of a kiosk. We've evolved since then, and that now many of our facilities in which we still have a kiosk of that nature, it is inside, and so they will go into an office, a smaller office, if you will, and the kiosk is located inside. It's much thinner, and many of our facilities have two of those now. In case somebody's using one, they can go to another, and it is more interactive. And they have the ability, we have cameras set up in the offices as well that connects to our call center. So they can go through the process, and it is interactive, with the person that comes onto the screen, not a live person, but a person that comes on and guides them through the process. And if they get stuck along the way, all they have to do is press a button, and the camera comes on, they're connected to our call center so they can finish the transaction. If they do have a question that requires somebody, they're immediately connected to somebody as if they were talking with somebody behind a desk at a facility like we used to do, 20 years ago or so. And in that office, we also have a 5 by 5, a 10 by 10, and a 15 by 20. So they can walk and they can see the size, the actual physical size. And we have a TV monitor in the back of each one that kind of walks them through. They just click a button, and it shows them what can fit inside of each one of those units. And then if they've forgotten a lock, there's another little kiosk in which they stick in their credit card again or cash, and they can get one of those round disc locks or the cylinder locks that we have in our units as well. So anywhere along the way, They can utilize the kiosk, but then also they can complete the transaction on their phone or from their laptop. Either reserve a unit and come down and meet with our manager that's on site at our facilities that do have managers and on-site personnel, or they can complete the entire transaction on their phone and get their gate code and just go in without ever having to come in contact with somebody, which most of our folks like. I mean, who doesn't like to skip the line at Starbucks and walk in and just pick up your coffee and, move on about your day? And that's the way that we treated storage, because that transaction, doesn't take a whole lot more decision making than it does to order your coffee in the morning.
Now, do you have self-storage units? I've seen some of them that actually add all kinds of stuff. They have like a U-Haul on the property. They have you can buy boxes from them. You can buy wrapping paper. You can buy tape and things like that. Do you have any of those, or is that something you're like staying away from?
Well, again, different business models. If we have a facility that is unmanned, we're kind of limited from somebody behind the counter that's actually kind of pushing and being able to do that. Yeah, the ones that we have a manager behind the counter, then there's literally like 30 to 35 different profit centers that we can add to a facility the U-Haul truck rentals or some rental agencies selling locks, boxes, and moving supplies. We have eBay services because we have a lot of folks that both ship eBay and Amazon, and if they get too busy and they need to sell some inventory or to pack and ship something, we can either list it for them or we can list it and sell it for them if they're in a pinch. We sell renter's insurance. We offer renter's insurance. We can't sell it because we're not licensed, but we offer that. We have vending machines. We don't have any. There are dog washes and pet washes that are set up inside of these units that hook up to the utilities, and just a number of different ways. Even the temperature controlled storage, for storing wine and furs and art and other collectibles. It's temperature controlled and humidity controlled as well. So yes, a number of different ways. Boat and RV and the concierge services that goes with that, from dump stations to propane. I mean, there's almost no limit to the type of concierge and add-on services that you can add to increase the dollar per ticket.
But is it cheaper to build than to buy, or is it cheaper to buy than to build?
Well, it depends upon cheaper. If you're looking at $1 per square foot, you're going to pay more for an income stream. Usually, a building or a facility that's already in place that has an income stream on it, because you're paying for the income stream. Unless it's an older, first generation Class C facility, then then the numbers change a little bit. When you're buying, you're buying without an income stream, so typically the cost per square foot is less. But it just really depends upon where that ratio is. And we like to build because we can somewhat control the direction of what the profitability looks like. We can kind of get a little closer to gauging exactly what that is going to be, but it takes longer, and you don't get cash flow for 2 or 3 years. It's just a bigger pot on the back end. So I don't necessarily look at cheaper, Jack. I'm just looking at the exit strategy in 3 to 5 years from now, which is going to get me more, which is going to net me more.
Yeah, because remember that. Yeah, that makes sense, because when you build it and you got it ready and you start filling it up, you're losing money because you now probably got a bank loan. And now it's filled. It's not going to be filling up in 24 hours. It's going to fill up over whatever, half a year, so something like that. And during that time, until it's fully stabilized, you're probably having negative cash flow. But then you probably overall have a lower loan, lower thing, and then the back end is higher. So again, everyone can decide which way you want to go into. But the cool part is that it's built on land. It's a simple business model once you run it, and you're the best in the world at teaching it. So with that said, tell us, how can somebody get a hold of you if they want to learn how to do this or just get more information?
Yeah, sure. Any and all things self-storage, you can go to selfstorageinvesting.com. That's selfstorageinvesting.com. Lots of free downloads and information to, just see if self-storage is something you're interested in to dip your toe in. And we can run through some case studies and a whole lot of information, at your fingertips for free. And we also, as we mentioned, we raise a lot of private equity, and we have passive investing opportunities there as well. So if you're looking to learn about the business, to do it actively or passively, all things self-storage, head on over there, and either myself or one of my team members will be happy to guide you through the process and help you on your journey.
I want to ask you one last question, and that is, as a beginning investor that is looking into this asset class, would you recommend them going to start with something like a smaller self-storage, perhaps in a rural area if they live there, or so if it's within the driving distance, let's say? Or would you recommend them go big right away, even if that means bringing on some partners and things like that? What do you find is the best way to get going in that industry?
Yeah. Well, I kind of stay away from advice. I'd rather share experience because there's
Yeah.
always an intrinsic value to any investment. And, what my prescription isn't always the best for anyone and everyone out there. So to your point, Jack, there's a whole lot of folks that if they find something in their own market and they can keep an eye on it and they want to manage it on their own to get their feet wet, which is a springboard to the next. And now the lenders see that you've proven yourself over here. And so now, will allow you to do say a development project or a larger project, that is a way to get into the business. But I would say in the beginning, it's a much better to buy something larger that you can afford to have a property manager or a third-party management company on site so that you can do what you get into the business for anyways, which is growing and scaling and working on the business rather than in it. Because the smaller the facility, the more it's going to pull you in and the more you're going to be involved in it. And so buy a larger one with a partner first and let that be the springboard to then get into an even bigger one afterwards, so that you actually have time to grow and scale the business. That, from my experience, that seems to be the better route to go.
Without being an expert in in self storage, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. That's exactly my experience from multifamily too.
Mm-hmm.
The moment that we realized just how many hassles it is to manage several small single families, we jumped right to 94 units, right to 146 units, right to 256 units. And it's almost like the bigger, the simpler it is. The bigger, the easier it is to manage. Like our 256 unit apartment complex causes us zero headaches. Our 90 unit apartment complex causes us zero headaches. The 45 that we own is one of the toughest to manage because you're in that gray zone in there. It's not enough to have full management, and it's enough to really have something strategic going there. So it's like it's either go stick with something really small, like a couple of things down the road, or go really big, and because it's actually simpler and more profitable.
100%. Yep, agree.
All right. With that said, thank you very much for being on the show with us. And with that said, that is a wrap. As always, give us that 5-star review, share it with your friend, press that subscribe, that notification button, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.